bringing people in rather than unintentionally keeping people out.
Inclusion is behavior that embraces and leverages our differences.
Inclusion is a sense of belonging, connection, and community at work.
Diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance.
What does inclusion actually look like in the workplace?
It's seeing people that look like me in senior leadership roles.
It's recognition that I bring additional perspective and value to the team.
Where being my authentic self is celebrated.
It means recognizing all holidays, not just Christmas and Easter.
It's knowing that my years of experience are celebrated for the value I bring today.
Inclusion means recognizing that not everyone eats pork or drinks alcohol.
Caring enough to give me flexibility so I can focus on what's important to me.
It means not being judged for taking time off to be home with my newborn son.
It means not getting assigned extra work because I don't have young children at home.
It means not assuming that I don't want to learn new skills or participate in the latest technology.
At PSCU, we're intentionally working together to create an environment where ideas, backgrounds, and perspectives are harnessed to deliver possibilities for credit unions. Inclusion means everyone, including you.
And together, we are PSCU.
nice definition, but what does inclusion mean to you?
Inclusion is intentionally bringing people in rather than unintentionally keeping people out.
Inclusion is behavior that embraces and leverages our differences.
Inclusion is a sense of belonging, connection, and community at work.
Diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance.
What does inclusion actually look like in the workplace?
It's seeing people that look like me in senior leadership roles.
It's recognition that I bring additional perspective and value to the team.
Where being my authentic self is celebrated.
It means recognizing all holidays, not just Christmas and Easter.
It's knowing that my years of experience are celebrated for the value I bring today.
Inclusion means recognizing that not everyone eats pork or drinks alcohol.
Caring enough to give me flexibility so I can focus on what's important to me.
It means not being judged for taking time off to be home with my newborn son.
It means not getting assigned extra work because I don't have young children at home.
It means not assuming that I don't want to learn new skills or participate in the latest technology.
At PSCU, we're intentionally working together to create an environment where ideas, backgrounds, and perspectives are harnessed to deliver possibilities for credit unions. Inclusion means everyone, including you.
And together, we are PSCU.
nice definition, but what does inclusion mean to you?
Inclusion is intentionally bringing people in rather than unintentionally keeping people out.
Inclusion is behavior that embraces and leverages our differences.
Inclusion is a sense of belonging, connection, and community at work.
Diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance.
What does inclusion actually look like in the workplace?
It's seeing people that look like me in senior leadership roles.
It's recognition that I bring additional perspective and value to the team.
Where being my authentic self is celebrated.
It means recognizing all holidays, not just Christmas and Easter.
It's knowing that my years of experience are celebrated for the value I bring today.
Inclusion means recognizing that not everyone eats pork or drinks alcohol.
Caring enough to give me flexibility so I can focus on what's important to me.
It means not being judged for taking time off to be home with my newborn son.
It means not getting assigned extra work because I don't have young children at home.
It means not assuming that I don't want to learn new skills or participate in the latest technology.
At PSCU, we're intentionally working together to create an environment where ideas, backgrounds, and perspectives are harnessed to deliver possibilities for credit unions. Inclusion means everyone, including you.
And together, we are PSCU.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Day 5 of the AACUC's Commitment to Change virtual conference. They saved the best for last. And just so you know, you are one person of over 1,000 attendees today. Today's session includes what some might call titans of our movement. I'm excited to absorb their knowledge. I am Kevin Martin, and I'm your Masters of Ceremony today. We hope that you are enjoying the conference so far, and I'd like to take a moment to just say thank you. To just say thank you to the AACUC and Miss Renee Sadie-White in particular for leading in this critical time in our country's history and creating a safe space for our movement to engage. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items. All sessions will be recorded and uploaded by August 24th. The recordings will be accessible the same way you access today's session through the conference center. We will have time for Q&A at the end of today's session. Send your questions via chat to the participant named **, questions for speaker. Remember, look for the ***. It should be at the top of your chat option. If you experience technical issues during the presentation, feel free to send a private chat to our tech team. Each tech team member has 2 asterisks in front of their name. We would love for you to share your experience on social media using the following hashtags. Now, you might want to get a pen because there's quite a few of them. Hashtag CTC 2020, hashtag AACUC 2020, hashtag changed, hashtag AACUC, hashtag CU_unite, and finally, hashtag CU_BLM. We will also ask for your feedback in a short survey after the conference is completed. On Wednesday, the AACUC presented an initial donation check to the United Negro College Fund of $6,000. We will continue to take donations throughout the conference and will make a second donation on Monday, August 17th. Our goal is to donate $10,000. If you would like to donate to the United Negro College Fund, please visit the AACUC booth in the virtual exhibit hall or donate directly at the @aacuc.org website. Prizes. Everybody loves prizes. At the end of this session, there will be a drawing for prizes donated by our sponsors and exhibitors. If your name is drawn as a winner, we will contact you to arrange delivery. Speaking of sponsors, we would like to thank our title sponsor today, PSCU, today's program sponsor, CUNA Mutual Group, and for all our other sponsors. Thanks to their generosity, thanks to the generosity of our sponsors and exhibitors, we've been able to bring this conference to you free of charge. Please thank them, all of our sponsors and exhibitors, when you visit them in the exhibit hall. I will now pass it over to our immediate past chairman and a good friend of mine, Adrian Johnson, for a special announcement. The floor is yours, Adrian.
Thanks, Kevin. Day 5. Wow, it's been an amazing week. I don't know about you, but this has been a great week. Special thanks to the moderators, the MCs, the panels, the great speakers. We've had great topics. We've had great conversations. So thank you thank you so much for attending, and thank you so much for participating. Commitment to change. Credit Unions Unite Against Racism. The other day I had a list of sponsors that I mentioned, and so I just want to make sure I go through and thank all the sponsors that showed out this week, and it's just amazing. Like Kevin said, the conference is actually free to the attendees, but if it wasn't for the sponsors and the exhibitors, they made this all possible. And so again, PSCU, CUNA Mutual Group, CUES, FIS Global, Suncoast Credit Union, Visa, Allied Solutions, Together Credit Union, Co-op, PFP, the Family Security Plan, Virginia Credit Union League, SRP, Federal Credit Union, and then our exhibitors, Credit Union Broadcast, CUNA, True Stage, Filing Research Institute, Humanity and O'Rourke, Inclusive, CASASA, NCUA, Repay Real-Time Electronics Payments, Total Life Changes, and then You Are Worthy. And so I just wanted to make sure that I recognize, I know I mentioned some names the other day, and I just wanted to make sure that I completed the list, didn't want to leave anybody out. And I just want to thank you all for making this possible. Special shout out, as Kevin mentioned, to our president and CEO, Renee Sattywhite, and then the conference committee has just done such amazing work this week. And of course, they had to prepare to get to this week, but I got to tell you, man, they've blown it out the water this week. And so I really appreciate that. What I'm really here to is my task today is really, as Kevin mentioned, immediate past chairman. And so I'm not out the door yet, but I am the outgoing chair for AACUC. And so what I did want to mention of the incoming chairman and his exec team, and then of course I wanted to mention the board members as well. And so Larry Sewell will be the incoming chairman, and Larry is the vice president, corporate partnerships and advocacy for Together Federal Credit Union in St. Louis, and I think it's just Together Credit Union in St. Louis, Missouri. Maurice Smith. You see Maurice on the screen there, incoming vice chairman. No needed words for Maurice. Everybody knows Maurice, just a legend. CEO, local government federal credit union and civic federal credit union in Raleigh, North Carolina. Tracy Jackson will continue to be our treasurer. She is the CFO for Resource One Credit Union in Dallas, Texas. And then our incoming secretary is Marvin York. He's the VP Contact Center Member Engagement, PSCU. And so he's down in St. Petersburg, Florida. The rest of the board, Lynette Smith, she's a past chairman, president, CEO, True Energy Federal Credit Union. And if Lynette's on the line, her and her husband are celebrating 38 years of marriage today. So just want to say congratulations. Timothy Anderson, another past chairman, president, CEO, U.S. Senate Federal Credit Union, Washington, D.C. Ed Presnell, regional business executive, Peach State Federal Credit Union in Lawrenceville, Georgia. And then Priscilla Awkward, VP Teller Center, Coastal Credit Union in Raleigh, North Carolina as well. And then we have two new board members, as mentioned the other day, Whitney Anderson Harrell, Chief Community Development Officer, Michigan State Federal Credit Union, and that's in Lansing, Michigan. And then Gary Perez, President, CEO of USC Credit Union in Southern California. So I just wanted to say congratulations to the exec team, congratulations to the board. Thank you for your leadership. And I'll turn it back to Kevin because it ain't over. Looking forward to this great panel, and take it away, Kevin.
Thank you, Adrian, and thank you for your leadership. And you're right, it ain't over. We are just getting started, ladies and gentlemen. And to get us going, oh, wait a second, we must have a typo here. It says I'm going to pass it over to Ashley Beach Reed, but that's not how I know Ashley. I know Ashley as Clean Ashley or Little Sister Ashley of State Employees Credit Union of Maryland, also known as Maryland. Will you introduce our guests and our panelists? The floor is yours, Little Sister.
Thank you. Thank you, King. Welcome to the Here, Now, Forever Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion General Session. I'm honored to introduce our panelists. We have Kathy Mann, President and CEO of Inclusive. Kathy is committed to continuing Inclusive's role of bridging the credit union movement to the community development field, promoting financial inclusion and identifying and connecting credit unions to unserved and untapped markets and communities. Welcome, Kathy. Angela Russell. You can't say that without putting a little oomph on the end. Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Vice President of CUNA Mutual's Foundation at CUNA Mutual Group. Angela leads the development, direction, and implementation of short and long-term strategies and programs that support diversity and inclusion. Chairman Rodney Hood. Chairman for the National Credit Union Administration's Board of Directors. He also represents the NCUA on the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council and the Financial and Banking Information Infrastructure Committee. Welcome, Chairman Hood.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Maurice Smith, CEO of Local Government Federal Credit Union and Civic Federal Credit Union in Raleigh, North Carolina. Maurice is the recipient of the 2020 Herb Wagner Memorial Award for Outstanding Individual Achievement presented by the National Credit Union Foundation, and the 2019 Annie Vamper Helping Hands Award given by Inclusive in recognition of those who make extraordinary contributions to the credit union movement. The real superhero, Maurice Smith, welcome. This session will be moderated by the one and only Monica Davey, Director of the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion at NCUA. Monica, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And thank you to NCUA for ACUC for hosting this panel discussion today. I am so excited and honored to be among these giants, not only in the credit union space, but these are actually giants in the DEI space. When I first started in this position 5 years ago, this past July, it was hard to find material around diversity, equity, and inclusion when it came to credit unions. So I am excited that here we are 5 years later, that we actually have a conference dedicated to this topic. And you can just see so much material around this topic right now. There's so much energy. So I'm so excited about this. I will start off by saying, as you know, I'm with NCUA. I'm a federal government employee. So I have to start off saying that the views that you hear from me today are my views. They don't necessarily represent the views of NCUA. We have to say that as a federal employee, but we're honored to have Chairman Hood with us today. So he is here representing NCUA. Again, I'm excited to be here among these giants. Thank you, Angela, for all the work that you do around DEI. I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Thank you to Maurice Smith. Those of you who have heard me speak before, you know, a couple of years ago when I first read that article where Maurice was proposing DEI as the 8th cooperative principle, I literally jumped out of my seat at NCUA on the 4th floor, ran up the stairwell to the 7th floor and asked, who is this Maurice Smith? And do we own these cooperative principles? Can we approve this? I still have the card, Maurice, from the hotel with your picture on it. I know you were embarrassed by that, but you are definitely our superhero within the industry. Kathy Mann, I first met Kathy a few years ago when it was the Federation at one of their conferences. And I remember sitting in the audience listening to her speak. And I thought, is she a chief diversity officer? She just oozed inclusion. So Kathy, thank you so much for the work that you do. And then lastly, Chairman Hood, my boss, we are just honored to have him in the position that he's in right now. He is the perfect person to be the head of NCUA at this moment and to be leading us in the industry for what we're going through. He has completely leaned into this issue of racial inequality and financial inclusion, and I'm leaning in right behind him. So thank you, Chairman Hood, for your leadership and for joining us today. Usually when we do panels like this, the first question that I would ask of the panelists is tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about your organization. We're not going to do that today. We're going to start off with some fun questions, and I'm going to start with Chairman Hood. I'm going to give you 2 choices and you just tell me your answer. Okay, Chairman Hood, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right. Beach or mountain?
Beach.
Biking or jogging?
Biking.
Apple pie, peach cobbler?
Peach cobbler.
The Color Purple or The Wiz?
Color Purple.
Marvel or DC Comics?
DC Comics.
All right. Beyonce or Mary J. Blige?
Beyonce.
All right. And this last one is for you, UNC or Duke?
UNC. Go Heels.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, Maurice, I'm going to go with you.
All right.
Beach or mountain?
Beach.
Biking or jogging?
Biking.
All right. Apple pie or peach cobbler?
Has to be peach cobbler.
All right. Color Purple or The Wiz?
The Wiz.
All right. Marvel or DC Comics?
Marvel.
My son would love you. Beyonce or Mary J. Blige?
Mary J. Blige, of course.
All right. UNC or Duke?
Have to go with UNC.
All right. Okay. Angela, you're next. Beach or mountain?
Beach.
Angela,
beach. I had to unmute myself. Beach.
All right. Beach. All right.
Yeah.
Biking or jogging?
Jogging.
Apple pie or peach cobbler?
Peach cobbler.
The Color Purple or The Wiz?
The Wiz.
Marvel or DC Comics?
Marvel.
Beyonce or Mary J?
I'm not pitting 2 Black women against each other. They're both great.
All right. I hear you. UNC or Duke?
Badgers.
All right. Okay. There you go. Kathy, this is for you now.
All right.
Beach or mountain? All right. Biking or jogging?
Biking.
Walking for me, actually. Apple pie, peach cobbler?
Peach cobbler.
The Color Purple or The Wiz?
Color Purple.
Marvel or DC Comics?
Marvel Comics.
All right. Beyonce or Mary J?
Mary J. Blige.
All right. UNC or Duke?
Well, at the risk of angering my fellow panelists, and as a former Duke grad, I'm going to have to say Duke, and we'll have to take it up in March.
That's right. And Chairman Hood will not hold that against you. Okay, all right. So I'm going to do one more unconventional question before we get to the meat. And Kathy, since your video is up, we will start with you on this first one. The head of my daughter's college actually did a resume of his failures. And what he did was he listed the failure and then listed what he learned from it. A lot of times when we have a panel that looks like this panel with all these amazing people on it, what we do is we assume that what we see, the success that we see, is all that there was. However, we know that to get to the successful place where all of you are, you had to go through some missteps, some challenges, some failures. I had one at a previous agency where I worked, where I applied for a job, I was acting in a position, and I didn't even get an interview, right? I learned from that I probably applied a little too early. So I would love for each of you to tell me about a failure, a misstep, or rejection that you experienced, and then what did it teach you?
So I'll have to say there was a period of time right after I was sort of shortly after college. I had had a job, and the job sort of the organization went through a lot of layoffs, and I found myself out of a job. I was sort of looking everywhere. I was living in North Carolina at the time, trying to, you know, just go everywhere. And it felt like everything I tried, I just could not, I couldn't find anything. So at one point, a friend of mine who had moved out to Los Angeles wrote to me and said, you have to come out, you know, don't worry about it. You could sleep on our couch for as long as you want, come out just for a month or two, see if you like it, you know, you should do this. So I drove across country. I went and slept on my friend's couch, and I started volunteering at an organization that worked with Central American refugees. And I was there about 2 weeks, and they said, you know what? We have a job opening of somebody to be a paralegal to help with political asylum cases for all these folks coming from Central America and who need representation. So I applied, I got this job. I ended up spending the next 7 years doing community organizing, immigrants' rights work, human rights work, and happened to be in LA during a very sort of volatile time when, you know, the LA riots happened, and there was a huge kind of conversation about kind of what is the right way to equitably rebuild. And that was my first introduction to credit unions, because the community I was working in started organizing a credit union. So it all worked out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. Maurice, you want to go next?
So you want to know about failures. So
I know you don't have many, Maurice.
Oh, no. I could take up the rest of this evening talking about failures. So in one particular case here, I would mention a few years ago, I was negotiating an extension of a contract with a vendor for the credit union. And so Chairman Hood, you know, close your ears. And so this was, so they offered us a small pot of money to extend the contract. I won't tell you who the vendor is at the risk of prejudicing them here. And later on, I find out that was a 7-figure opportunity cost for our organization. Because what contract had in it was basically a bait and switch. You sign up for one term and something else was going to happen later. So what was embarrassing about this is I'm a lawyer. I should have picked that out, but I missed that altogether. So I went to my board, fell on the sword, and said, guys, I screwed up. I missed this. And they gave me a slap on the wrist, said, let's try not to do that again. What that taught me, you know, in the spirit of diversity here, that whenever you are making a big decision for your organization, you should have the right voices around the table, whispering in your ear the things that you should be thinking about before you make a decision like that. So from now on, going forward, I know that when I have to make a big decision, I try to be mindful of the things that I think I know, but maybe I don't know, and I need to have good counsel around me. The best counsel are people who have different perspectives. So when you have time, you buy me a drink, sit around the bar, I tell you about a lot more failures, Monica.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Maurice. Angela, would you like to go next?
Sure.
Similar to Maurice, I feel like I could take up the whole entire time talking about failures because I don't think that perfection is a thing. And I think that failures are important and that's how we learn from them. One of them, and I've had a plenty, both personally and professionally. I'll give one professional one and one personal one. Professionally, I was younger and I took a job because I thought the title sounded awesome and it had some weight and haughtiness to it, and I hated it. I was there for 4 months and I'm like, I got to get out of here. So I learned for me is don't take a job just for the title. Make sure that you know what you're walking into. And make sure that you have a support system around you. And also in that, one of my key mentors told me, don't run from a job, run towards something different. And so that takes a lot of self-awareness. So that's one example professionally. I think the biggest failure in my life has been my divorce. And I've learned so much from that. I was married for 16 years. It didn't work out, but there was so much shame and blame that I was putting on myself, and coming through that and actually learning on having to fight those stereotypes of being a single Black woman and what that means in America and all that other kind of stuff. That was a huge failure for me, but I actually learned a lot about myself, learned a lot more about being compassionate and empathetic, and quite frankly, it's made me a better person. So that's what I've got for right now.
Thank you. Thank you for that transparency. And Chairman Hood, would you like to go next?
Yes, well, thank you, Monica. And what a very timely question. I think as one reaches a certain age, they think about things that they could have done differently earlier in life. And for me, a colossal failure occurred very early on in my career, everyone. And that was as one of the few men of color in banking and financial services in my hometown of Charlotte. I thought that in order to be promoted, you didn't just have to work hard, you have to work really hard. So I went through those early years of working late hours, taking on projects, taking on a lot of tasks that others did not want. And then you get to the point where you are emotionally drained, you're competently drained, but yet you're still getting your deliverables accomplished. I was passed over for 2 particular promotions to the point where I asked, well, gee, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. I'm not just the super banker, I'm the super banker. I'm doing my financial services work. I'm doing my outreach. And the comment was made, what would we do without you? So you want to be valuable, but you don't want to be so valuable that you're indispensable and that you're looked at as being such a core part of a team or endeavor. So the manager then sat me down and said, still do the job, but don't go around volunteering and doing all the things. Again, as a man of color, we often know one needs to go twice as far to get halfway there. And that was a lesson learned early on. And it prevented me from a few opportunities that, who knows, it could have changed the trajectory of my life had I not been the Duracell financial services person early on. But I've learned now to really keep it all within balance.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Okay, now we're going to get into the meat of the DEI. Angela, this first question is for you, the substantive question. We often hear DEI counterparts ask, what does success look like in a DEI space? And many people will say that success is not needing chief diversity officers, Angela, like you and myself, a world where everyone is treated fairly and where they don't need us. What do you have to say on that subject, Angela? And will we always need to prioritize DEI and have folks like Angela and Monica leading organizations through this work?
Yeah, I think that's a great question in terms of what does success look like, and does success look like us not needing this role? I'm going to take a step back because when I was reflecting on this question, it caused me to reflect on this role in general. Sometimes I'm like, it is so weird that this is my job. My job is to help people appreciate difference. This seems pretty base. I mean, not to be too direct. Sorry, everyone knows I'm direct. I guess I don't need to apologize for that, but it just seems so basic. Why can't we just see and value each other's differences? But then when we think about the history of our country and how we've historically been cleaved apart from each other, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually, of course, we need to see each other's value. So yeah, I think it's going to be a bit until we actually understand that diversity is valuable and necessary. So I think that these types of roles will be necessary for a while. I don't know how long. it would be interesting to have a world where it's not necessary, but I don't see that in the next 3 to 5 years.
Right. Angela and I, this work is so hard that we do. I can tell you a couple weeks ago, it was 2 a.m. in the morning. We both happened to be awake and we were texting each other about how hard this work is. So this next question is for Chairman Hood. Chairman Hood, whenever I hear you talk about DEI, you almost always connect it to financial inclusion. What is the relationship to you, and why is financial inclusion so important to this conversation?
I think, Monica, financial inclusion is important to this conversation because it is indeed the civil rights issue of our generation. When I look at some of the intractable issues that are taking place in communities of color throughout the world, for that matter, when we look at what's happening with COVID-19, and we've seen the disproportionate number of communities of color that have been impacted, that on top of what happened with the tragic murder of George Floyd, we are seeing a lot of these issues that are bubbling to the top. And a lot of that stems back from lack of access to financial services, lack of access to economic prosperity. And from those early days that I started in my career, I've always cared about helping vulnerable and marginalized communities. And I think that until we can provide access to capital for a lot of these communities, never are they going to be able to meet their full potential, both in terms of the economy, but also in terms of some of the health disparities that we're seeing as well. So I definitely want you all to know that this isn't a new commitment to me. I have been leading this charge for quite some time. And I just now think that we as an American society have gotten to the point where people all agree that there's more that needs to be done. So I'm first and foremost, I am thrilled beyond belief to oversee our credit union industry, because you all credit unions grew following the Depression when men and women, hardworking men and women from the steel plants and the manufacturing facilities and people of color, they couldn't get traditional financing. So they galvanized and pulled their resources together to create the system of cooperative credit we have today. So it's because of credit unions always being able to help people who've been marginalized. I'm calling on credit unions specifically to help be a part of the solution, to address these issues through having MDIs, through having CDFIs and low-income designated credit unions. Together, I want to give them all the regulatory tools that they need to bring about greater diversity. And as you know, and working with me at the agency, it not only means working within the credit union system itself, it also means having a pipeline of talent. You all, the statistics of people who are of color, who are in financial services have not changed in 20 plus years that I've been in the industry. I certainly am proud of the fact that UNCF is one of the beneficiaries of this year's fundraising efforts, because those are the colleges and the HBCUs that are going to prepare the pipeline of students that we need to help join in the quest, again, of providing financial access to communities of color. It is the civil rights issue, and I want to continue to work in partnership with folks like AACUC in addressing those goals or issues.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chairman Hood. Maurice, this next one is for you. People often refer to you as Superman. I'm going to call you our Black Panther. How do you do it all? How do you do it all? Why do you do it all? You're the CEO of 2 credit unions and on multiple boards. Tell us why this DEI work is so personal and so important to you.
Thank you, Monica. That's a good question. Well, next Thursday, August 20th, I'll celebrate my 41st year in the credit union business. And so a little over 4 decades of doing this work. So there's more to my career in the rearview mirror than it is in front of me. And so I feel this strong imperative to try to accomplish all I can with the time that I have left for my working career. I grew up with a father that taught me about the values of hard work, but also about the contributions and opportunities that each of us have for our communities. Our credit union is on this trek, if you will, to do something meaningful and impactful about poverty. So how do you eliminate poverty? Or how do you give working families and communities a fair shot at the American dream? And so as we've started thinking about this and studying the impacts, the social determinants of poverty, access to healthcare, to employment, to fair housing, to education, it seems like that the common denominator, the underpinning for all of these concerns is economic empowerment. is giving communities and individuals an opportunity to manage their money the best way they can, to have an opportunity to build intergenerational wealth, to be able to be good financial consumers of their work. So as we think about how do we help our communities thrive, I don't know how a credit union or a family or a community or any organization can claim that it has reached the pinnacle of its self-actualization if any one group of its population is not doing well. So you take the credit union membership. Our credit union want to be the very best it can be. But if we have any staff member who feels less appreciated, undervalued, and do not have the opportunities to become the very best they can be, then our credit union is not going to be the best it can be, nor will our membership get the best services it possibly can get. We see DEI as perhaps a moral and an ethical issue. Racial justice and equality, those are important factors for us to consider. But we see DEI as a smart, strategic, value for our organization. We want to compete in a commodity world. A checking account is a checking account is a checking account. Yeah, we can change features and prices and branding, but it all operates pretty much the same in the commodity world. So how do we as an institution stand out in a crowded field? And we think the core values of our organization is what gives us a competitive advantage. Part of that core value is the DEI mantra. We want every single staff person, every stakeholder, every member to be their very best. And it means moving the population and moving the staff forward, not leaving anybody behind. So as we think about how do we do something about poverty, how do we enrich communities, how do we find a way to help individuals become their very best selves, it begins with our credit union staff, our team members, our employees, in ensuring that we have laid out the right kind of core values that everybody succeeds, no one is left behind. If that happens, we're the best credit union we can be, and we will take very good care of our membership. 41 years is a long time to be doing this, but I am just as jazzed by the work that we do today as I was when I was a young, skinny little loan officer working at State Employees Credit Union, trying to figure out how to fill out a loan application and not get it wrong. I'm still committed to the work that we're doing today. And I'm proud of the conversations like this that we are having as a movement, because this is going to make the entire credit union movement better by focusing on topics like this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maurice. And someone put in the chat function, Mr. Smith is awesome. I agree. He really
All right. Thank you.
Kathy, this next one is for you. Kathy, I'm not sure if you had a bigger fan at that conference where you announced the new name of your organization. I sat in my seat and I can remember texting people back at NCUA so excited about the new name that you all chose. Tell us a little bit about your organization's journey to your name change and the meaning behind it.
Thank you, Monica. And I have to say that was a very scary moment for me, being up on a stage with our members assembled and our partners and our friends and colleagues across the movement to unveil that new name. And I was so grateful to you for your immediate reaction and enthusiastic response, because it really did confirm, for me where I think we were going. It was a scary moment because the Federation, which is the name of our, what we used to be known as when we were the National Federation of Community Development Credit Unions, a lot of people, our members, feel a lot of ownership and engagement and love for our organization. And I had inherited this organization that had been in existence for almost 40 years at the time. And we knew we were coming to a point where kind of rethinking our name and rethinking kind of the way in which we talk about our work, that it was critical to do it. But we really knew that it was not going to be easy when you have so many people who are so invested in an organization. And so we really did try to make the process very inclusive. We spent a year engaging our members in multiple ways through, launching it at the annual conference before that we were going to start this process. We did town halls, we did webinars, we did surveys, we did in-person interviews, we did phone interviews, but we really wanted to get a voice from everybody about what it meant to be part of the organization. And we knew we were going to move away from a name that was sort of descriptive, National Federation of Community Development Credit Unions. That's what we do. And we really wanted to kind of think about something that conveyed the change that we're trying to make in the world. And again in the conversations with members, what they talked about was the sense of inclusion, and it was pervasive through everything. It was about the way in which they ran and existed and they ran their own credit unions, and the way in which they participated in our processes they felt was inclusive. But most importantly, it was coming up again and again as this is such a fundamental moment for us to be, as a movement, really directing all of our attention and resources and focus to financial inclusion for all the reasons that that the panelists have spoken about. The importance of making sure that we fulfill that promise of who we are as credit unions. We are organized as credit unions, as cooperatives, because we believe that the financial system has not worked for everybody in an equitable way. And that's why we are in this movement to begin with. And so using our organization as a way of sort of propelling the best of that in our members felt like, it all kind of came together, and it was scary, but we had a really good and positive response. And I think that, folks have just really dove in and been part of and leading this journey ahead of us and alongside us all ever since.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I like to say that if you don't intentionally include, you will unintentionally exclude. So I love the example of even how you came about getting opinions about that name change. Thank you so much for that example. Angela, this next question is for you. And I'm going to steal this question from Michelle Outlaw at a previous ACUC Commitment to Change session on a Friday. She asked all the panelists, what does a world with no racism look like? Can you describe it to us, Angela?
Sure, I love that question. And in prepping for panels, whenever I have hard questions, I go and seek the answers from my kids because I generally like what they have to say. So I was talking to my 12-year-old son about this, and he's just like, well, duh, people just love each other. And I'm like, you don't have anything more to say than that? He's like, no, that was easy. And I'm like, okay. So I loved his kind of innocence and his way of thinking about things. He's like, if we love each other, there will be no racism. So that's one thing. There are a couple of other things that I think that in a world with no racism, what that would look like. Number one, I think that, and I'm going to center Black folks in my response. We would no longer have to hustle for our worthiness. So Chairman Hood, you talked about that notion of having to work 3 or 4 or 5 times harder just to get to the same thing, same equal. We wouldn't have to hustle for our worthiness because we would be seen as inherently worthy because we are in humanity together. That would be huge. The other kind of thing that I think about when I was thinking about this question is where in a world with no racism, the color of our skin wouldn't place barriers on us while we were still in our mother's womb. So we know that even before we're born, that based on how we come out looking, what we come out looking like, that there won't be barriers. Even if we're born to a Black mother, that Black mother is facing barriers and with maternal health already while we're in the womb. Not having racism would mean that those barriers wouldn't be there. A world without racism would end some of the historical trauma that we have to live through day in and day out, not only from history, but current day history that's being made into the future. So, and I think all of that comes back, honestly, to my 12-year-old's answer. we would be able to love each other in a real way. I love the work of Valerie Carr, and I have her book on my bookshelf right behind me, and it's Kaur. And she has this book that recently came out it's called See No Stranger. And it's this notion of when we love radically, we are not strangers from each other. We are all in humanity, shared humanity, and seeing each other for everything that we bring rather than lessen or power over. We're all in this together. So that's what a world without racism could look like.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm just going to start with you with this next question. This question is for everyone, but we'll have Angela to go first. Tell us how the George Floyd murder touched you and whether you healed from it yet.
Yeah, that was hard. And some people who I work with know this. That was, I think, on a Friday. That following week, it was a Monday or Tuesday. I don't actually remember the day of the week. We were having a meeting at work, and the meeting was about to start as business as usual. And there are a couple of us Black folks that were just kind of looking at each other virtually, just kind of virtually checking in. We're like, yeah, we're not in a space where we can go in and just do business as usual. And we literally all started crying. That is not something that typically happens in a work setting, but it was necessary and cathartic. It's touched me in very deep ways. It's for my son, he's now coming to the realization that racism isn't this thing that we talk about at a systemic level, which we do a lot at my household, but it's also, he's now worried about, are people gonna kill him? And I hate that. I thought a lot about this notion of healing. I mean, how do you heal from an incident that actually is not just one incident? We've got George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, the murderers of Breonna Taylor who are still free, and the list goes on and on and on. And so there's healing in those instances, but the healing that we need as both Black folks and our country, and these are phrases that I just learned or terms that I just learned, is that the healing from trauma, historical trauma that's passed down, that we're continuing to live through, but also that intergenerational trauma too. So knowing that the things that our parents went through and that their parents went through, we are now seeing that show up in DNA at the epigenetic level. So healing, how do we heal from all of those generations to make sure that we are creating something better for the next generation? And I don't think that 3 months or since however long it's been since the murder of George Floyd is gonna get it. Healing is a lifetime of work. And what someone recently told me is just like trauma is passed down, healing can also be passed down. So the healing that we do today is going to be so beneficial to everyone else that comes after us. But healing takes work. It's not just going in and talking at a session every once in a while. It takes intentional work. That's all I've got.
Thank you. No, that was awesome. And Chairman Hood, I'll go to you next. Chairman Hood and I have had hosted several conversations about this at NCUA. Can you tell us about how this murder touched you and whether or not you've healed yet, Chairman Hood?
Oh, thank you. And Monica, as you know, and I will share with others, ladies and gentlemen, I was deeply and profoundly troubled by the murder of George Floyd. It's not the first time that I, as a man of color, have heard about abuse of authority or abuse of power by our police force, but it's the first time that it played out for the whole world to see. It was the first time for me to see, as the whole world watched, this egregious disregard for life that was exhibited by the policeman with the knee on Mr. Floyd's neck in a cavalier manner. But what really hurt the most, you all, was that he knew he was being recorded, yet thought he could still get away with those horrible actions with impunity. To watch for the whole world to see and to have the hands in his pockets. So that to me was very troubling. It was troubling also because I tell folks that I too could be George Floyd. It harkens back to me as a little boy growing up in North Carolina, or for that matter, I could have grown up anywhere, but it was in North Carolina where my father sat me down and talked about what I should do as I was learning to drive in terms of how I'm to keep my hands on the steering wheel, that if I am stopped, not if, but when I'm stopped, that I'm to be very polite, that I'm supposed to at least announce what each action will be. Sir, I'm now reaching to the glove box to get the registration, to get the insurance information. I'm to do all these things just to survive that encounter. This is a talk that took place nearly 40 years ago. And the fact that I now am still having to have similar talks with my cousins and these young men of color that I mentor, it is just really troubling that we have not really gotten beyond that. So I'm glad with Angela that yes, healing can begin, but it will be generational. I think the healing process can be catalyzed now because it's taken us as a society 400 years to have the very conversations that we're having today. I and my nearly 30 years in business have never been able to have a platform to discuss these types of issues, nor have people that you've been hearing from, such as Ursula Burns, the first lady to be president of Xerox, who's of color, or Mr. Ken Frazier, gentleman of color, who was the first president to be head of a pharmaceutical company, that being Merck, which by the way has a credit union. You are now finding CEOs and people of color like me who now recognize it is our duty to address these issues head on, which is why I, upon the George Floyd tragic murder, felt compelled to write an op-ed to the Wall Street Journal where I talk about healing, and again, healing and civil rights going together in tandem. So this is an issue that I'm hoping that the dialogue can continue, but I would like for us all to catalyze around George Floyd, because these conversations would not be happening. You would not have the companies and other entities keeping this ongoing. DEI is very top of mind. To all of you who are in the space, it's always been important, but now more than ever is it important for us to advance the ideals and highest tenets of helping each other, helping vulnerable communities. And I, as the first man of color to oversee a banking regulatory agency, I would be derelict in my responsibilities if I did not take on these issues head on. So that's why the George Floyd murder really touched me profoundly. And I tell people I could have been George Floyd, or very well still could be. And people often say, well, you are the chairman of NCUA. For I get stopped twice a year for not doing anything inappropriately when I'm driving. And they yet have asked me, what do you do from 8 to 5? They don't ask if I'm a champion for financial inclusion and civil rights. They just assume that if you look like me, there must be something that once you pull me over that I've done wrong that will come and come to the forefront. So again, I am using this opportunity to be a champion for those who need champions now more than ever.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chairman Hood. Kathy, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I mean, I think like everyone on the panel and in the participants, I felt at the same time sort of a sense of shock, a sense of, it did feel like, the murder of George Floyd following the murder of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, it felt, as a person who believes that, I've been sort of part of this work and supporting, social justice work for the better part of my life. I think for the first time, I think in the aftermath, as I was talking to friends and colleagues and coworkers and others in our community, I feel like I was finally listening and hearing the pain, the fear, the day-to-day issues that you all are talking about. And I think, I was part of a community discussion, and a young woman, talked about the pain of going through, she had just graduated high school, going through high school and never feeling like the narrative of the heroic narrative was never about her. And, it made me think a lot about my own, family and my own upbringing. And I'm the granddaughter of 4 Irish immigrants. And we always had this narrative about, how our family, kind of made it against all odds. And, this sort of heroic immigrant narrative that was so much a part of the culture that I was immersed in growing up, and all of a sudden I feel like in these last several months, I've, if you look at these kinds of narrow narratives of heroes with a new lens, and you start saying, well, wait a minute, my uncle benefited from the GI Bill, my other uncles were able to get into unions, my grandfather was able to raise the capital from people in the community and extended family to open a store. Like all of this sort of heroic narrative of this immigrant experience about, how we alone kind of, managed to survive the odds. When you look at it with the lens of systemic racism, you realize that, my entire narrative has been one of white privilege, and has been one in which white privilege maybe helped 2 generations ago, a poor family, but it was a benefit that so many of my friends and my colleagues and have not had the benefit of. So it's been a very interesting time, I think, for many of us who have felt like they've been allies for a while in the movement to start deconstructing a bit what it actually means when you're listening to stories of your close friends and coworkers about the struggles that you all are going through. And so I feel humbled, and I feel I don't know where healing will come, but I feel like we have to have the courage to deconstruct our own stories and start relearning our own stories with a new lens and new eyes. And so for that, I feel like that's sort of where I am now, and I'm not quite sure where healing will be and how I can contribute to it. But that's sort of where I'm thinking.
Thank you, Kathy. And I saw that Adrienne just put in the chat comment, thank you for your courage. It does take courage for white folks to admit the white privilege piece. So we thank you for that. Maurice, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Monica. I want to echo what Chairman Hood mentioned earlier about having that talk with his nephews. I've had that talk with my son as well. And we raised both our children in a fairly calm suburban environment, and the good kids, never been in trouble. But our son is 32 years old, 6'3", 190 pounds, big broad shoulders. He's one of these fitness nut kind of folks. He's as gentle as a butterfly. He wouldn't hurt anyone. He would help anyone. He would give you the shirt off his back, literally. In fact, he's actually done that before. So he would help anyone he comes across. But I explained to him, late at night, a police officer pulls you over and you step out of the vehicle as tall as you are and the size that you are, you look like a menace. And so you should be very careful about how you are approached by law enforcement. And so I explained to him keeping his hands, in plain sight, pulling over, turning on the interior lights, projecting what you're going to do, reaching for your driver's license or anything, but also have your dad on speed dial and call me, just put the phone down. Don't announce I'm there. I want to listen to the conversation. Also, I've given him lessons on his constitutional rights as a citizen about search and seizure, what you should expect, should not expect. And so those are the kind of conversations we have to have with our children and among ourselves. What was particularly hurtful about Mr. Floyd's murder, it was that it was done with such impunity, as Chairman Hood said, because the officer knew he was being, filmed. He didn't fear any retribution or consequence for it. It just seemed like a perfectly normal day to him. And I just found that to be particularly shocking, that he would act in that manner. I don't mean to portray that all law enforcement are bad actors and do things that are wrongful. But apparently there's enough bad actions occurring in our communities that we should call it out. And and so I wrestle with what the solution could look like. Should it be change law enforcement, or should we have more informed, better equipped citizens who know how to protect themselves and know what their rights are and what conduct they should, perform themselves in certain circumstances? I'm not exactly sure what the answer is. And there's been a number of these incidents over the years that have occurred from beyond Trayvon Martin and afterwards that gives us cause and concern about our safety in our communities. But this is the one that seemed to make a difference to the world. and it's the one that shocked me the most. And so as we think about how do we fix our society, our community, and the opportunities for all people, I'm happy to see in a venue like this, and even with protesting in the streets, that we as citizens, members of the community, have decided that we've had enough, and that we're going to speak out about it and do something about it. So even as much of a tragedy as it is, I'm encouraged to see the hope that's coming after this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maurice. Chairman Hood, this next one is for you. And right along the lines of healing, as an industry, we tout that DEI is in our DNA and that DEI fits right into that mantra of people helping people. You mentioned this a little earlier in a recent op-ed. You discussed how financial institutions can actually help heal America. Can you elaborate on this and just tell us what does that healing look like that financial institutions can have a part in?
Yes, Monica, thank you. And that's, again, a very timely question, because when I talk about the healing process by way of financial institutions, I'm talking about them, you all, catalyzing change, catalyzing growth opportunities for small businesses. We know that the economy can only grow if small businesses have access to capital, and especially in communities of color where that access is not always abundant. I am calling on institutions, primarily credit unions, because I know that they have it in their DNA, as I may have mentioned. They grew out of the Depression. When folks could not go to Main Street banks, they went to credit unions because they were serving their needs completely. You all, and I've seen firsthand, so when I talk about financial inclusion, it's not just platitudes or rhetoric. You all, as a young gentleman in financial services, working with a young lady who was going through one of our financial counseling programs and affordable housing programs, this would have been about 20 years ago in Charlotte. This was a young lady who never thought she could own her own home for her young family. So after about 6 months of constant training and outreach, she was able to get that house, that she was able to not only buy her first home, but she was able to build up enough equity to now send all of her 2 kids to college. This is a young lady where she was able to have access. There are similar stories I can tell of entrepreneurs who still have those businesses going today, or those individuals of color who are able to get loans to send their kids to school. That to me means, you all, that education and outreach and financial inclusion can bring about shared prosperity, but it's not happening at the rate that I certainly would like to see it, nor any of you for that matter. One of the things that I really think that can really address this issue is getting proximate. If you all know Brian Stevens, and he's the author of the book Just Mercy, where he talks about when you're wanting to really address some of these issues, when you're wanting to help marginalized and vulnerable communities, doing a drive-by doesn't get it accomplished. It's being proximate, it's being nearby it. Our minority depository institutions, the 514 MDIs that we're blessed to have within the credit union community, those are the institutions that I certainly want to empower to bring about some of this healing, promoting shared prosperity and financial inclusion. I'm so pleased that we have credit unions such as the one in Mississippi that was able to do 1,000 PPP loans for a median loan size of $13,000, and also able to make a loan to an HBCU. I'm also proud of that small MDI that's in Alabama that was able to make a $4,000 loan to a barbershop through the PPP program. I want to empower a lot of those institutions because, again, they are proximate. Those truly are the first line responders when it comes to helping these communities of color reach their full potential. So I've given you all my word. First and foremost, I want to create the regulatory platform, reducing regulatory burden so you can have the effective policymaking efforts you need to grow, thrive, and succeed. Because of the role that I want MDIs to play, I would like to announce to this group today at AECUC that I would like to work with NCUA and all of you to host an MDI access to capital convening in the months ahead. And this would be bringing in impact investors, bringing in foundations, bringing in all the folks in the ecosystem that can help with subordinated debt, secondary capital, similar to what you've seen with the media streaming company that just provided by way of an impact investment to one of our credit unions. I want to build forth an ecosystem or an infrastructure to bring all of these individuals together to help bolster our MDIs. So you all, again, wanting to partner with all of you with Inclusive and AACUC and others around MDIs and access to capital. And also at that summit, you all, it means that I may also be wanting to look at creating de novo MDIs, How do we get into individuals and institutions who want to create MDIs, who want to sustain them? That is a way that we can provide a long-term solution. And again, to quote Brian Stevens, it's about getting proximate.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chairman Hood. And hopefully we have some NCUA folks on the line listening and they wrote that down, right? So
yes.
NCUA. Maurice, this next one is for you. You've proposed again that DEI, that we add that as the 8th cooperative principle. It's been 2 years, I think, since you made that recommendation, or a little over 2 years. How is the industry receiving your recommendation? And what is your response to those who say that DEI is already incorporated in the 7 cooperative principles?
Thank you, Monica. First, I want to echo back to Chairman Hood's announcement. Chairman Hood, you're my hero. So sign me up for the summit. I'll be there. All right. So the 8th cooperative principle, I think, has been received warmly in the credit union business. I've talked to some of my colleagues at various credit unions and trade associations who believe this is a time that has come to have DEI recognized among the principles that govern not just credit union co-ops, but all other types of co-ops around the world. Monica, the debate that I often have with individuals is that why should it be an 8th principle? These principles are like, stone tablets that come off the mountain. And some might, if you have a generous reading of principle 1, you might arrive at a conclusion that maybe DEI is a part of that. I want to offer an argument that it's not. So constitutional scholars, when they look at a writing, there's an approach called originalism. Originalism says that you look at some writing, some constitutional or some kind of proclamation or legislative document, and you look at it in the context of the time in the period that it was written, so that you now have an idea of what was in the minds of the authors of the piece when it was written. The 7 cooperative principles were written back in 1844. Now let's think about that for a moment. What did the world look like in 1844? This is some, 20 some years or so before individuals who look like me were emancipated from slavery. This is about 3/4 of a century before women through the suffrage movement would get the right to vote in the United States. So my argument is, for the authors of the cooperative principles in 1844, they were not thinking with the same kind of sensibility that we have today as we think about DEI. So to imply that principle 1 incorporates today's notions of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it was intended from the beginning, is just not believable to me. So I think it's important that we as a cooperative movement, as a credit union movement, that we have an 8th principle, make it unambiguous. Let's put a stake in the ground, put our flag in the ground saying, we are for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we believe so much about it that we are going to make sure that the world knows it, and we're going to have a separate principle that highlights these values. Now, the cooperative principles are owned by this group called the International Cooperative Alliance. And they basically adopted them in 1900 for the whole world to see. And the principles are looked at, they're reviewed every so many years. I think maybe 2018 was the last time that these principles were opened up and looked at, and a few words are tweaked here and there. So my contact with the ICA suggested they would normally look at these principles again for another 3 years, maybe 2023. But as it turns out, they're going to have a conference in South Korea in October, and the idea of an 8th principle is going to be put on the table. So we have some hope. Hopefully we can stir up enough trouble here in the United States co-ops and credit unions that's going to get the attention of the ICA that says, wait a minute, we should go ahead and have this memorialized as its own separate line item. Now, but this isn't just for credit unions. It's for all kinds of other co-ops. It's not just for the United States. It's for the entire world. So, long answer to your question, I think the credit union movement is accepting this. They want to do something meaningful about this. My challenge to credit unions as in general is let's lead on this. Lead in our own nation. Let's lead in the world. That we have a separate principles here for DEI. And now, what does that language look like? There are smarter people than I who can come up with what the specific proclamation ought to say. But when the audience sees it, they should have no doubt whatsoever what it means, what we believe, and the values that we stand on. So I'm looking forward to continuing the dialogue and the debate and having others bring their best ideas forward. But I believe we as a credit union movement and as a community will be all the better for doing something that's going to be historical and meaningful for our communities. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you, Maurice. And we have a few comments in there saying you're getting into good trouble, and we thank you for getting into that good trouble.
I accept that. Thank you.
All right, Kathy. This next one is for you. We've heard a lot about financial inclusion. From your perspective, what is the credit union system's unique role with respect to financial inclusion and social justice at this point in time right now?
Yeah, thank you, Monica. And I have to say, sort of that, the chairman covered it so well in, talking about the examples, both the history of, where credit unions came from, that basically credit unions have been organized as financial cooperatives to be able to be delivering the types of access to capital that has been lacking in communities all over the country and globe. And they are such an ideal vehicle. We are such an ideal vehicle because we are financial cooperatives. We are locally owned and controlled financial institutions, which makes us ideally and sort of uniquely positioned to understand evolving needs in the communities that we're serving. We're not just serving communities, we're being led by communities and leading with communities. So I feel like it's, in our DNA, in our structure, we are so perfectly kind of aligned with the ability to deliver on the promise of financial inclusion. We work quite a bit at Inclusive. We work quite a bit with banks. We get, from large national banks, we actually raise capital that we reinvest in community development credit unions all around the country. And we are able to raise that capital because the banks recognize that they are not able to serve. They don't and can't, or they can't or won't, depending upon the verb you want to use, but they are not reaching communities that community development credit unions are reaching and the broader credit union movement is reaching. I think the challenge for us as the movement and thinking about it in the broader sense, the most empowered sense of inclusion, and in this broader sense of how do we use financial inclusion as the vehicle for greater equity and greater social justice, I think it's important that we keep those principles alive within our institutions every day. And I think part of what we need to do as credit union leaders is be looking at our institutions critically all the time. We are uniquely positioned to deliver on this promise, but you're not always necessarily delivering on that promise in every way that you possibly could, right? So we need to be constantly vigilant about the types of products and services that we're developing and taking a look at who's using which products and who's benefiting from which products. We are cooperatives, so we need to make sure that the products and services we design and deliver are being equitably accessed and used. So I feel like even within the space that we do, and we do so much around delivering upon the promise of financial access, in order to truly reach that promise of inclusion, we can be doing a lot more in sort of pushing ourselves to make sure we know how and who is using the credit union. And is the credit union truly empowering all of our membership segments equally. And if certain products are being used by one membership segment and certain products are being used by other membership segments, we have to ask ourselves why. We have to re-look at those products. We need to re-look at the systems, the delivery systems in which we're bringing those products to our communities and our memberships. So we have so much and we are so uniquely positioned, but we have a lot to do to make sure we're living that promise every day.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy. Angela, this next one is for you. As a fellow DEI professional, I know at least in my past, we spend a lot of time talking about the D and I, right? Actually, language used to be D&I, diversity and inclusion. You, however, because I think of your background, have been talking about the E for a long time. And I once heard you say, and I love this quote, and every time I use it, I give you credit for it, the status quo is resilient. What do you mean when you say that, and how does it relate to equity?
Yeah, so I actually like that quote too. That's why I say it. I think that we have a short attention span in general. And I think sometimes we have these moments and we get excited and then things kind of revert back to normal. And I think it has a lot to do with equity, because we're not going to create the vision of financial inclusion unless we have equity at the center. And for me, moving equity forward actually in this moment means going beyond the standard DEI. It means, what are we intentionally doing to become an anti-racist movement? Not just complicit in sitting back and saying, hey, I'm not racist. I've never said a racist thing in my life. That's not it. We're understanding the system and nature of racism and understanding how our country was built to benefit white men financially. And until we can start really having real talk about that and addressing it, we're going to still be in the status quo. We know for DEI and equity, most of the time actions and works around DEI, equity, affirmative action have benefited mostly white women. And it continues to happen until we start being intentional about being anti-racist individually and collectively. We're not going to see movement. Some colleagues and I were in this meeting yesterday. The guy that works at Netflix, doing inclusion at Netflix, his name is Darnell Moore. We were chatting and he says, it's good that folks are talking about George Floyd right now, but what happens when the hashtag changes? And that's it. So we will go back to the status quo as soon as a new hashtag is starting to happen, unless we are completely and totally intentional about being anti-racist and really understanding how the credit union movement and folks in the credit union movement have also benefited from the system of white supremacy. One book that I've been recommending a lot to folks is this book called Me and White Supremacy. And it's a deep dive, it's a hard read, and it really goes day by day to help folks understand how each person has been complicit in this system. Another book that I've been recommending is How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I know that these topics are hard, I know that they're emotional, but unless we're willing to be individually transformed, we're not going to transform the system and society at large.
Thank you. Thank you, Angela. Maurice, this next one is for you. In the DEI space, we often talk about the frozen middle. We know sometimes it's really easy for those at the top of an organization to make a commitment to DEI, right? You can sign something, you can make a pledge. What's hard is having that commitment in the organization to trickle down to what we call the frozen middle. So talk to us a little bit about what specific actions should we as leaders take to ensure that our middle managers have the tools that they need to eliminate this frozen middle?
That's a good question, Monica. So let me start from the top and maybe work my way down. So if you're executive or senior level management for an organization, it's important to understand the obstacles that get in the way of DEI. So part of that is a scalability problem. There are only so many seats sitting in the boardroom, and there's only so many seats in the C-suite of an organization. So you have a scalability problem. Because when you start talking about diversity, bringing in different points of view and different individuals, if I'm already in the C-suite, I might feel a little threatened because there's only so many seats that you bring somebody new in, somebody has to go. And so it creates friction, and it creates maybe a little bit of insecurity as you have this conversation. My advice to the executive suite of any organization is to consider DEI as a savvy, strategic, direction for your organization. And so when perhaps in a later conversation, we can talk about the strategies of DEI. Take the emotions, take the ethics, take the morality out of it, because there's a fair argument to be made that your organization can be much better by employing DEI principles. It'll make you a better competitor in the marketplace. Let's go down another level into middle management. So how do you get a competitive and fighting advantage for advancement to the C-suite or advancements in your organization? By looking for the barriers that keep you from getting there. I have learned here shortly that there are barriers to advancement for people for a number of reasons. And those who work in the C-suite of the organization are usually blind to what those barriers are. I've tried to spend my career advocating that I don't need you to give me a handout. I don't need a lucky break. I just need for you to move the barriers out and allow me to perform based on my ability to succeed. So if you have middle managers that say, I want to succeed, I need to show you where the barriers are. Whether it's the application process, whether it's in the evaluation system, maybe it's the compensation and incentive program that a credit union might have. If you already know where the barriers are, don't assume that the senior leadership of the organization know where they are as well. So if you just point out those stumbling blocks and say, let's get these blocks out of the way, it is in the credit union's interest that middle management succeed to senior level management and the organization do well. And if there's any stumbling blocks there and you're in middle management and you feel like you're frozen, then do something about it by pointing out where the issues are and give your organization an opportunity to remedy those. I judge an organization about how inclusive it is, how open it is, how well do you give your employees an opportunity to advance to the highest level their skills and talents will take them. If you have somebody who is underperforming because there is infrastructure and systemic barriers to their improvement, then you're hurting your own credit union. I would argue to you that you violated a fiduciary duty of loyalty and care to your membership by allowing something to impede the ability of your institution to serve your community and your members. And so if you are sitting in middle management level and you have the line of sight to see, here are the things that are getting in my way for advancement, point it out, throw a flag on the play, get somebody's attention, because you're not just doing yourself a favor in terms of your career, you're doing a favor to your credit union and your membership as well.
Right. Thank you so much. And I'm going to ask just two more questions, and then we'll get to the couple of questions that we have in the Q&A. Chairman Hood, during the many conversations that you and I hosted within NCUA, you told me that you wanted to participate in every single one of them. You also said that this was the first time in your career that you have spoken so openly about race. You said that it's taken us 400 years to have this conversation, and you wanted to make sure that you didn't miss one of them. What prompted you to engage at this moment?
Monica, that is a real profound question. And I have to almost say what Angela said, I agree with her wholeheartedly. We in America tend to have short attention spans, and the hashtag could change at any given moment. But there was something profoundly different about what played out with George Floyd's tragic murder. And that is, as I may have mentioned earlier, the whole world saw it. Not only was I getting comments and emails from people who live here in the United States, but I had folks reaching out to me from London, Japan, Hong Kong. They were all saying, how are you feeling? What on earth is going on in your country? To which I had to remind them that this is not the first time that you've seen abuse of power, abuse of authority. I said, this is the first time it played out because we all were, in many instances, working remotely. I think COVID-19 has had us perhaps paying more attention to those types of things because we were all around the screen. What would have happened, typically we would have talked about it with family and friends, but it would never have been in such of the public discourse the way it is today. So it's taken 400 years for what has been a reality for many men and women of color. We've lived with those ordeals. We've mentioned Breonna Taylor and others, but that has been a part of our existence. And we've had to deal with those perturbations on our own accord, normally with family and friends. But now this incident has been so unique because I, as a Black man, can talk about these issues head on and not be labeled the angry Black man. I normally, if I had written an op-ed to the Wall Street Journal or any publication for that matter, why would they have written it? It would have been one man's views. And again, the moniker of angry goes attached to any of these types of incidents. But now the freedom is there, the opportunity is there. And again, I would be derelict as the first African-American to oversee a banking regulatory agency to not use this platform to let folks know, yes, systemic racism has existed. It still exists, but we are now able to talk about what are some of the tools and techniques that it's going to take to address these issues head on. And what can I do, more specific to me as the chairman of an agency, what can I do to advance and level the playing field around financial inclusion, back to the MDIs and CDFIs and low-income designated credit unions. So I do think that if I'm going to talk about the issue, I want to provide a solution as well. So I'm not just being emotional, but I'm trying to be strategic and intentional about some of these efforts that we're discussing today.
Okay, so I have 2 minutes. You answered the one question, Chairman Hood, about where they could find that article. And it's in the Wall Street Journal. You do need a subscription if you want to get it. The next 2 questions, though, Maurice, I'm kicking to you. And you have to answer them in 2 minutes, Maurice. One was, how did you know at a young age? How did you know at such a young age that you wanted to get into this work? And then the other question for you, Maurice, is what can people on this call do to make sure that the DEI principle is one that can get incorporated? What actions can we take as an industry? So you got 2 minutes, Maurice.
2 minutes, all right. So I knew at the age 12 that this is what I was going to be spending my life doing, working in financial services. That's when my dad asked me the question, what did I intend to do with my life? And so I chose banking because he explained to me that most of the problems we have in our community is because of lack of economic resources. If I really want to help people do well, then I need to get into the banking financial business. And so he encouraged me to go to college. He said, you have to major in business. He said he would help me. And we would spend our time from age 12 until I went to college talking about business and Rule of 72 and how economics is created and wealth is dispersed in the community, about right and wrong and disparities. Those are things we spent time talking about instead of talking about cars or sports or girls. So he enforced me to encourage me to think about those things that be good for our community. What can we do as credit unions to help with an 8th principle? Start a grassroots movement. Go back to your credit unions. Get your boards to approve a resolution or make a statement that you believe there ought to be an 8th principle. We don't have exact language, but you believe in the ideal. Be loud about it. As soon as your board approves it, send out a press release, send it to the trade associations, talk to everybody, create as much noise as you can about this. Because if the United States credit unions create enough noise, enough good trouble, if the credit unions, if the co-ops in the United States also catch fire and they do the same, it will be heard around the world. And hopefully when the ICA meets in South Korea in October, they would have heard us loud and clear and they would do something meaningful. Less than 2 minutes, Monica.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the panelists and a special shout out and thank you to Renee. Thank you for allowing me to sit on this panel with these giants. And this is not the end of this conversation. It's just the beginning and I'll kick it right over to Kevin.
Thank you for that. That was amazing. Let me tell you what you just saw, ladies and gentlemen. When I was going to watch the play Hamilton, everybody told me how great it was going to be. And I was like, it can't be this amazing. And then I watched the play and it was better than they all told me. This is exactly what just happened today. Believe the hype. This is where you get it raw, uncut, and delivered to you. I appreciate you, panelists. And I want to just quote my great friend, Angela, no longer have to hustle for our worthiness. I'm going to take that home with me. With that said, let's move on. We want to give away some prizes. Our first title sponsor, PSCU, is giving away a pair of Apple AirPods, something that I use every single day. So congratulations to Kelly Holloway from State Employees Credit Union. Congratulations, Kelly. Second, today's program sponsor, CUNA Mutual, is offering Raycon Performer E55 wireless earbuds. I'm not saying that again. I hope you got that. And CUNA Mutual chose this product because Raycon is a Black-owned company. And the winner of those earpods is James Gergen from CPM Federal Credit Union. Congratulations. And then third, our final prize is a $50 gift card from the AACUC, and the lucky winner is Kevin Martin. Oh, that's me. Oh, wait, hold on a second. I'm getting from the booth. Oh, I'm not eligible. We just spent an hour and a half talking about inclusion, but you're going to exclude me. Okay, that's fine. The winner is Troy Simmons from South Coast Credit Union. Congratulations to all our winners. We will be in contact with you about delivering them. If you are not currently a member, I got to ask the question, why? Where else in the movement can you have these types of conversations? Where else can you gain this type of insight? In fact, I want you to open up another browser right now. I want you to go to aacuc.org, click members, and join the family. Stay engaged, stay informed, share your story. If you have questions first, please visit the AACUC booth. Next up, we still have things coming up for the rest of the day. I'm going to give you a list of some. Everything is in Eastern Standard Time. Please visit our vendor exhibit halls, open till 6:30. Our young professionals will be sitting with the great NCUA Chairman Rodney Hood at 4:45. The women's chat discussion on DEI. I'm still waiting on my invitation to that chat with the women. I'm just saying, just include me. I'm okay being in a room full of women. And the men's chat on inspiration is going to be at 6:30. The AACUC after hours reflections from the conference will start at 7:15. You're getting all this for free. So please engage. We look forward to seeing you there. We truly appreciate you joining the African American Credit Union Coalition Commitment to Change Series virtual conference. It's our hope that the thoughtful conversations, new networks, and ideas exchanged this week are just the start of an ongoing conversation. We encourage you to share what you've learned when you go back home to your colleagues, members, and community. Don't leave it here, pay it forward. We hope that you feel inspired. We hope that you feel empowered. Together, through the lens of DEI, we can continue to move this conversation forward and create better outcomes for our communities of color and ultimately our nation as a whole. Again, I invite you to join us tonight and tomorrow for a few more events. For those members and soon to be members, you can look forward to more impactful programming throughout the year as we continue our conversations on commitment to change, Credit Unions Unite Against Racism. And in closing, I leave you with some words from a favorite poet of mine that I remember when I'm feeling pressure to be something that I am not. Never go with the flow, be the flow. Thank you for your support and stay safe.